hello and welcome. I love this Women in Dentistry group. I'm hoping you guys can help me. Right now, I want it to be a little more interactive. I know I post content on here for you every week, and I genuinely want to help you. Learn things that are important for your practice. I want you to be happier in your practice. I want you to have less stress in your life, like all of that great stuff. And I want you to know and to feel like this is a really safe place to post questions, to ask in the group if there's something that you want to know more about or get other people's opinions on. So please, if you have a question, you can DM me directly anytime you want, but post it in the group and see what everybody else has to say. I'm hoping we can support one another. Today we're going to talk about one of the things that goes into building and having a dream team of employees. And I know for a lot of you, there's been a lot of frustration over the last couple of years with finding good people, retaining good people. And I know the struggles are different, state to state, country to country. Up here in Canada, at least in Calgary where I am, that hasn't been quite as big of an issue for me. I found that every time we've had to hire here, we've managed to find some pretty good people, but I can appreciate that. And so this idea of what to talk about today came to me because there are some ways to take okay or good employees and turn them into like great or superstar or amazing employees. And I think what we're going to talk about today is one of the things that you can do to have this start to happen in your practice. So I hope everybody had a totally awesome Easter weekend. And this topic lends itself really well to what I just like to talk about as patient experience. And because the experience that your patients have within your practice, whether you are a general dentist or a specialist, is absolutely critical to the success of your practice, but also to how stressful being in that practice is. Because if people are having a good experience and you're having a good experience with those people, a lot of the stressors that come with working in healthcare, working face-to-face with people day in, day out, starts to fade away. And as there's less hiccups, there are less things to mitigate, to fires to put out, all of that good stuff. And I know you guys know this, but we have different personalities, different types of people that work in our practice. And sometimes we have a small team, 2 or 3 team members, and sometimes we got 30 team members, and there's going to be different dynamics. And your different employees can really provide a different experience to your patients. And sometimes that's amazing, and sometimes that's really bad. And because we want people to be talking about us in the community so that more people come and see us, know about us, hear how awesome we are, and want to come to our practices, we really want the messaging that's going out to always be consistent and ideally, positive if possible. And one of the ways to create that is to do the things you can to make sure that every patient has the experience that you want them to be having more uniformly across the board. Of course, nothing is 100%, but you want to have things set up in a way where most of your patients will have the awesome experience that you intended, and there are fewer instances of people winging it or a one-off where the experience isn't as good as it could have been because maybe the person wasn't sure of what to do or they haven't been trained on what to do. There are many steps to this. And ideally with team members, the struggle is real, and our job as a leader or owner or both is to make sure that we're doing things that can make it easier for our team to give our patients the amazing experience that we want them to have. And that should be across the board, whether that employee has been with you for 10 years or for 6 months, right? We want to make sure that it doesn't really matter who they have contact with, what interactions they have, that it's actually turning into the experience that you want it to be. And I'm going to go through with you just some really simple steps you can take today. We're going to go through them step by step. I'm going to use my practice a little bit as an example here on how you do this, how you ensure that you have consistency of experience across the board as much as possible, so that when your patients leave the practice and they're talking about you, they're saying the things that you want them to be saying. So let's start with step 1. We always have to go back to the very beginning. Don't skip this step. I say this step and everyone thinks it's so easy and then they skip it. Don't skip this step. The very first thing you need to do is define the experience that you actually want your patients to have. And I mean, write it down. I say this all the time. Write it down. Write it down. Not just thoughts floating around in your head about this topic. Actually write it down. as we get into how you apply this and make it a reality in your practice, you need to know exactly what it is you're trying to create, because then you're going to filter decisions through this. So the idea of standardizing and systematizing things to make it easier for you, easier for your team, so that your patients get that awesome experience that you're trying to get them to have, is that we have to define some things very clearly at the beginning. So this is critically important. What experience do you want your patients to have at your practice? And I want you to write it down in as much detail as you can, but use some good words, and then you're going to try to simplify it. And I'm going to get you started here. The first thing I want you to think about is, if someone were to ask a patient of your practice what their experience was like in your office, or how they felt in your practice, what words would you maybe want them to be saying? That's a good place to start, because if you can imagine what someone might say and you really like what you're hearing, then that's probably the experience you're trying to create. So start there. For me, this was really easy. When I sat down and did this years ago, I wrote down that I really want people to say that they felt like we cared about them and that we made the experience as fun as possible. And as an orthodontist, that was super duper important to me, because caring encompasses a lot of things, like how we do things and how we think about things. And I do truly care about each and every one of my patients, as do you. But the aspect of like lightheartedness and fun is also super important to me, because that's what makes my days enjoyable and makes me want to be at work. And so I knew that caring and fun were the two like key pillars in what the patient experience in my office should feel like. And really that's it. It's that simple. But by having this idea and this definition, it then shapes every decision I make around patient care and patient interaction. And it's important because it actually helps me make decisions, because it makes it easy. So when I say write it down, I mean write it down. Don't just have a loosey-goosey idea in your head about what you think you want. It is very hard to take action on that. Write it down somewhere. And of course, just because you write it down doesn't mean it can't change, but you need a starting point. Like, you have to have somewhere that you're starting from. Step 2, we're going to take my practice as an example. So what you need to think of in step 2 is, where are all the critical places where there are interactions that happen with your patients in your practice? And for me, I had to think about, okay, in all of those critical places, how do I want that to look or feel or sound like with caring and fun in mind? Because I have to keep that in mind. And so I had to think about every touch point. As an example, phones. How do we answer the phone in a way that is caring and or fun? Now I said and or because in every interaction, you can't always have both. So in some instances, it'll be very easy to be caring, but it might be hard to be fun. And in some instances, it'll be super easy to be fun, but maybe a little bit hard to be caring. So you're going to take your definition and you're going to use it however you need to. So phones, how do we answer the phone in a way that is caring and or fun? When people are greeted at the front door when they enter, for the first time or any subsequent time, how do we greet people in a way that shows them that we care about them? Or maybe that gives them a little taste of the fun and lightheartedness that might happen in the practice. In giving post-procedure instructions, as an example, as you guys would know in an orthodontic office, there's a whole lot of talking that happens every time we put something in someone's mouth. So how do we give instructions to our patients that leave them feeling like we really care about them? And how are we keeping it fun? And when I sit down and decide how we're going to, as a team, decide how we will do things, it's always through that filter. When you have a reference point, it means you can make decisions much more quickly, because you're always just going back to that filter of, let's see what will work with how I want people to experience the practice. So once you figure out all your major touch points and maybe have some loose ideas jotted down for how you can build out that experience, then you're on to step 3, which is to try to build out a system or a process for each of those touch points. Because once you have a system or a process, then you can train on it and begin to make it consistent so that every person is doing it in the exact same way. So as an example, on the phone, you need to sit down and script what it is that you want people to say. What greeting do you want them to use? What sign-off do you want them to use? How, as an example, do you handle frustrated people? Script it. Give them examples and ideas of exactly the lines they could use to calm someone down, to let them know they're going to, resolve this, get help, whatever that is. You actually have to figure out what you want that to sound like or look like, and then write it down for them. Just telling them that you want the phone conversation to be caring and or fun will not be enough, because everyone's definition of that is going to be slightly different, and it's your practice, which means you get to decide how you want that to come across. So you get to pick the words or phrases. And of course, there's always room here for people to personalize it and make it sound their own, but you have to decide what the critical messaging is for you or what you want that to sound like, and then you're going to teach them to do that. As an example for us, maybe giving Invisalign instructions, so procedure instructions, we have to think about what do we say, in what order do we say it, what do we provide to the patient, and of course, then I have to write out what do all of those steps look like. Do we need to create a checklist? Do we need to have a script and a checklist? Do we need to have something digital or in print, or do we need to have something laminated that we check off with a dry erase marker? I mean, and believe me, we've done all of these in our office, but we have to decide what is the best way, once we have a system or a process or a protocol in place, to then be able to do it. So to consistently do it over time. And so what you do not need to build these out 100% all by yourself. That's not what I'm suggesting, but you need, especially if you are an owner or a leader of the practice in any way, you have to have an idea of what each of those touch points needs to look like for you. The things that you think are critical to get across to people, your idea of caring or fun as an example, or maybe your idea of calm and peaceful, or whatever it is, the experience you're trying to create, you have to have a rough idea of what that is. Then when you go on to step 4, you're going to have your team help you to build out all of these systems and processes. It would not go over well for most teams for the doctor to spend, we'll say, hours and hours and hours and days and days and days coming up with very strict protocols and all the details and just putting down exactly what you think and then just telling everybody this is exactly how it's going to go. In general, especially with newer generations coming on board, that is not going to go over well. You want your team to help you create and design systems and processes because you want their input. Because if they have input into the system or process, they're way more likely to buy in and to see where you're trying to take this and to understand, where you're going, and then to want to be involved and to help you. And one way to get this, and I've talked about this in a few other videos, but to get people to accept change or to be willing to help you make change, you have to make sure you explain to them how this will benefit them, right? So what are some ways that this might benefit them? Well, by creating systems and processes for everything that happens in the office, it's going to be easier to train and onboard new team members. Everyone's going to know everything because cross-training is easy, so duties can be equally shared if you need to do that. Your patient experience is going to be the same or consistent over time, which means people are probably going to like you more. They're going to refer to the practice more. You're going to get busier, which means there's going to be more opportunity for them within the practice to grow, to get raises, to get more perks. I mean, whatever it is that you want to tell them. But you want to make sure that they understand that this bit of work up front to get these systems and processes in place is truly a benefit to them. Yes, it's a benefit to you in the practice, and that's important too. But it's also a benefit to them. And people like to know that something is going to be a benefit to them, right? They're never going to be as invested in the practice as you are. It's not their practice. But if they know that changes you're making are going to benefit them, they are way more likely to be on board with you. So you get the team involved, which means, like I said, you don't have to do all the work. Yay! You're going to have people on your team who are going to help you build out systems and processes, which means if you decide you need checklists or you decide you need scripting done, then you guys can break up in small groups. You can assign certain people to certain tasks, and you can work together to get all of these built out. The final step, step 5, is to finalize all of your systems and protocols and start to train on them. Now, this to most people sounds incredibly overwhelming because I basically just said that there's a bazillion places where you have contact with your patients in your practice, and all of it should be systematized and have protocols assigned to it so that every patient gets the same experience across the board. That is impossible to do all at once with a snap of your fingers, so you really should only do one thing at a time. You're going to get that thing the way you want it. As an example, you might decide that phones is super important and you really need to be working on those systems. Great. You're going to get that the way you want it. You're going to train on it so that everybody understands the systems and processes that you've created. You're going to practice it. You're going to refine it or update it or change it as you need to, as real life starts to happen, and you can figure out what's working and what's not. And once that one is up and running and everybody knows it and is using it and it's working, then you move on to the next thing. Because if you try to change too many things all at once, change fatigue starts to set in and you're not really going to change anything, and it will automatically fall back to whatever is easiest and the way it's always been done, and you'll find that you're no further forward than you were before. So how do you decide which one you do first? I always say, think about what's going to move the needle of your practice the furthest. Is there a place where you're struggling? Is there a certain focus that you have right now that you know there's a key component that you need to improve upon? As an example, if you have a lot of, I wouldn't say complaints, but you can tell that patients are frustrated or upset by certain things that seem to be happening consistently in the practice, start there. If you're really focusing highly on growth, maybe you're a startup and you're really trying to grow the practice, then figure out where is the best place that you can put some time and effort into this so that you can move the needle forward to get to growth more quickly, right? Eventually, what you really want is to have everything that happens within the four walls of your practice to have a system, a process, or a protocol attached to it. What this does is it makes it so that there is never any guessing. Everything that you do can be replicated by any human who can read. So if you have a system or a process or a protocol and they can read it, they can read what that is, someone can train them on what that looks like, and then they can copy it. Maybe they have a checklist as they're doing it the first couple times to make sure they always do it in order, whatever that is. It is much easier to onboard new people and get them up to speed super duper fast. It's also possible that anyone can step in and help or do anyone else's job if necessary, because there is a detailed system, process, and protocol written out for that position. It also means that every patient that walks into your door can expect to get the same awesome experience that you desire for them. As an example, we all know that first impressions are super important, and what happens when patients first walk into the practice, especially that very first time, is very important to how they are going to feel about you, think about you, talk about you from that point forward. And if their first experience walking into the practice is not so great, you'll be lucky if they come back. But if the first time they come in, it's awesome, and then after that it feels like they got ignored a few times, and then maybe it's okay again, that lack of consistency, that uncertainty about the experience they're going to get when they come to your practice will hurt you in the long run. And I know that saying just create systems, processes, and protocols for everything in your office is very easy for me to say, because that is easier said than done. But everything in business, essentially, is easier said than done. What I can tell you is that it is completely worthwhile. There is time and energy and training. There's an investment that's upfront for all of this, but then once it's in place, everything else is easier. So you need to define the experience you want your patients to have in your practice. This is, even if you do nothing other than this, it will start to change the way you think about things and make decisions. Define the experience you want to provide to your patients. Run everything through that filter, and then systematize, standardize, protocol the heck out of it, and make it as foolproof as you possibly can. If you do this well, it will pay off in spades, because every time you need to hire and onboard and train new team members or new processes with existing team members, this is going to make it a million times easier. Do not leave your team guessing or winging it. That will never create your dream team, because then you're always going to have some patients that sometimes have a better experience than others, and vice versa. And you don't want it to be that way. You probably, as I do, want it to be as fantastic as it can be every single time. And the only way for that to be the case is for you to define what that experience is, and then set up a system or protocol so everyone can do exactly what they need to do to make it that, and then train everybody on how to do it that way and hold them accountable to doing it like that. You can totally do this. I've done it. I am not special in any kind of way, but anybody can do this. And you don't even have to do this super quickly. It took us 18 months to get all of our systems and processes put into place. And yes, they still need to be current, they need to be updated, and we need to talk about them regularly and all of that good stuff. But man, does it make things easier when you have a way that you do every single thing, so that I can look at one of my employees that's literally been with me for 2 months and someone who's been with me for 10 years, and they're doing the same things in the same way. So the experience across the board is fantastic. You can do it. Okay, I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.